The shotgun blast echoed across the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Wyoming, silencing every soul within earshot as Hazel Montgomery stood trembling, smoke still curling from the barrel in her hands, and the town's most powerful man crumpled in the dirt before her. It was May 1878, and in that single moment, everything changed. Murder, someone finally screamed, breaking the stunned silence. She's killed Judge Warren. Hazel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The weight of what she'd done, what she'd been forced to do, crashed down upon her shoulders like an avalanche. She hadn't wanted this. God as her witness, she hadn't wanted any of this. Somebody grab her. Another voice called out, and suddenly rough hands were seizing her arms, wrenching the shotgun from her grip. No, she cried, finding her voice at last. You don't understand. He was going to. Shut your mouth, woman. Sheriff Dawson snarled, slapping iron cuffs around her wrists with such force that she winced in pain. Judge Warren was the finest man in this territory. Whatever lies you're fixing to tell, save them for the hangman. It's not a lie. Hazel's voice broke as they dragged her toward the jailhouse. Her eyes frantically searched the gathering crowd, seeking a single sympathetic face among the sea of contempt and horror. Please, you have to believe me. But no one would. Judge Elias Warren had been the backbone of Promise Creek for 15 years. His word was law, his character beyond reproach. And Hazel Montgomery was just the young widow who'd moved to town less than a year ago, working as a seamstress to make ends meet. Only one figure stood apart from the muttering crowd, watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. Rancher Rhett Blackwood leaned against the hitching post outside the general store, his weathered face unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. Unlike the others, he didn't join in the chorus of condemnation. He simply watched and wondered. 3 days later, Hazel sat in the stifling jail cell, her once neat brown hair hanging limply around her pale face. She'd barely slept, barely eaten. The accusations thrown at her from passing townspeople through the small barred window had been relentless. Murderer. Jezebel. Liar. The cell door creaked open, and Sheriff Dawson entered with a tray of food and a sneer. Got a telegram from the circuit judge. He'll be here in 2 weeks' time for your trial. He set the tray down with deliberate carelessness, spilling water across the hardtack and beans. Though I don't rightly see the point in wasting his time. Whole town saw what you did. Hazel looked up, her hazel eyes the feature that had given her the name rimmed with red. The whole town saw me shoot him. They didn't see what happened before. Save your stories, Dawson snapped. Judge Warren was a pillar of this community. A God-fearing man who gave you work when you needed it. He gave me more than work, she whispered, but the sheriff was already turning away. You'll hang for this, he said matter-of-factly. Make your peace with the Lord. After he left, Hazel picked listlessly at the food, fighting back tears. The judge had indeed given her work mending his clothes, making new curtains for his grand house on the hill. He'd been so kind at first, so understanding about her widowhood, her struggle to survive after her husband Thomas died in that mining accident. And then the gifts had started. Small things she couldn't afford to refuse. Then the visits to her tiny rented room. The insistence that she owed him. The threat that he could have her thrown out of town with a single word if she didn't comply. The door to the jail swung open again, and Hazel tensed, expecting more abuse from another deputy or townsperson. Instead, a tall figure in a dark duster stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years under the western sky. Miss Montgomery, Rhett Blackwood said with a slight nod. Name's Rhett Blackwood. I own the Double B Ranch outside of town. Hazel said nothing, merely watching him warily. She recognized him vaguely, one of the territory's more successful cattle ranchers, though he rarely came into town except for supplies or the occasional drink at the saloon. Sheriff's gone to lunch, Rhett continued, approaching her cell. Gave me 5 minutes to speak with you. Why? The word came out as little more than a croak. I've been watching Judge Warren for some time, he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry. And I've got questions about what happened that day. Hope flickered in Hazel's chest for the first time in days. You believe there might be more to the story? Rhett's blue eyes sharp as a hawk's studied her face. I believe Elias Warren wasn't the man this town thought he was. And I believe there's a reason a woman like you would take up a shotgun against him in broad daylight. A sob caught in Hazel's throat. No one else will listen. I'm listening, Rhett said simply. For a long moment, Hazel searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or cruelty. Finding none, she drew a deep breath. He came to my rooms.
Said he owned me now.
That no one would believe me if I spoke against him. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. When I refused him, he became violent. Said he'd make sure I was run out of town as a harlot if I didn't comply. He'd done it before to other women. Rhett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, allowing her to continue. I managed to get away, but he followed me, all the way to the general store where I'd gone to buy thread. He cornered me as I was leaving. Hazel's hands trembled. He had a knife. Said if I wouldn't give him what he wanted willingly, he'd take it and then cut my throat. Make it look like some drifter did it. She looked up at Rhett, her eyes fierce despite her fear. There was a shotgun on the rack outside the store. Old man Turner keeps it there for snakes. I grabbed it. Warned him to stay back. He just laughed and kept coming. Said no one would believe a woman over him. So you pulled the trigger, Rhett finished quietly. I didn't want to kill him, Hazel whispered. I just wanted him to stop. Rhett was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once, decisively. Miss Montgomery, I'm going to help you. Why would you do that?
You don't even know me.
I know enough, he replied, placing his hat back on his head. And I know what it's like when power corrupts a man. I've seen it before. The sound of boots on the boardwalk outside signaled the sheriff's return. Rhett straightened, his expression becoming neutral again. Just one thing, Miss Montgomery, he said, his voice low. Did the judge ever write to you? Leave any evidence of his?
Attention.
Hazel's eyes widened slightly.
Yes.
Notes with the gifts. I kept them hidden beneath a floorboard in my room, under the bed. A hint of a smile touched Rhett's lips. That might just save your life. Before she could ask what he meant, Sheriff Dawson pushed through the door, scowling when he saw Rhett. Time's up, Blackwood. Whatever business you got with the prisoner is done. Appreciate your courtesy, Sheriff, Rhett said smoothly, tipping his hat. He glanced once more at Hazel, something unspoken passing between them, before striding out of the jailhouse. For the first time since the shooting, Hazel felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was the possibility of it. Outside, Rhett mounted his bay gelding, mind already racing with what needed to be done. Promise Creek had always been Elias Warren's town. The judge had ruled it with a firm hand that most appreciated law and order in a territory where such things were precious commodities. But Rhett had been watching, noticing the pattern of young women who suddenly left town after spending time in the judge's employ, hearing whispers from his ranch hands about Warren's temper when crossed, things the townsfolk either didn't see or chose to ignore. He'd done nothing then, but he wouldn't stand by now. Rhett rode first to the modest boarding house where Hazel had rented a room. Mrs. Peterson, the owner, was reluctant to let him in. I don't know as I should, she fretted, wringing her hands in her apron. Sheriff's already been through looking for evidence, and Miss Montgomery being a murderess and all. Mrs. Peterson, Rhett said gently, I'm just looking to collect some of her personal effects. Items a lady might need while awaiting trial. He pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. I'd be much obliged. The older woman's resistance crumbled.
Well,
I suppose it couldn't hurt. Poor thing, whatever she's done. Rooms at the top of the stairs. first on the right. Rhett found the room easily enough, a small, neat space with few possessions. A dress hanging on a peg, some mending in a basket, a worn Bible on the bedside table. He knelt beside the narrow bed and ran his fingers along the floorboards until he found one that gave slightly. Prying it up, he discovered a small cloth bundle. Inside were several folded notes and 2 small packages wrapped in fine paper. He scanned the notes quickly, his expression darkening as he read the increasingly threatening words penned in the judge's distinctive handwriting. These he tucked inside his coat. Evidence, just as he'd hoped. His next stop was the saloon, where he found exactly who he was looking for: Tobias Wells, a former lawyer from St. Louis who'd come west for his health and now spent most of his days drinking away what remained of his life. "Wells," Rhett said, sliding onto the stool beside the gaunt man. "Need to have a word." Tobias looked up blearily from his whiskey. "Blackwood. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need your legal expertise. For a case." A bitter laugh escaped the former lawyer. "My legal expertise isn't worth the paper my now-defunct license was printed on." Rhett leaned closer. "It's about Judge Warren and the woman who shot him." Something flickered in Tobias's bloodshot eyes: interest, perhaps even a hint of his former professional pride. "What's your stake in this, Blackwood? You sweet on the Montgomery woman?" "I'm sweet on justice," Rhett replied evenly. "And I don't think she'll get it without help." He pulled out the notes he'd retrieved from Hazel's room, keeping them below the bar top as he showed them to Tobias. The lawyer's eyebrows rose higher with each one he read. Well, he murmured, suddenly sounding considerably more sober. "Our esteemed judge had quite the way with words, didn't he? Submit or be ruined, not very subtle." "Will it be enough?" Rhett asked. Tobias considered for a moment. "Maybe. Depends on the circuit judge. Depends on the jury. Depends on how much this town loved Warren." He took another sip of whiskey. "Why come to me?" "Because you're the only man with legal training in 50 miles who isn't already convinced she's guilty," Rhett said bluntly. "And because I remember who you were before the bottle got you. A damn good lawyer who believed in justice." The older man's face softened slightly. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Blackwood." "It's not flattery if it's true." Rhett placed a heavy pouch on the bar between them. "There's enough there to keep you in good whiskey for 6 months. Or to get you some decent clothes and a shave before you represent Ms. Montgomery at her trial." Tobias stared at the pouch for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he pushed his half-empty glass away. "Get me some coffee," he said. "And tell me everything you know about this case." Over the next 2 weeks, Promise Creek simmered with tension. The saloon buzzed with gossip and speculation about the upcoming trial. Some quietly admitted they'd always found the judge a bit too interested in the young women of the town. Others called for immediate justice, demanding that Hazel be hanged without the formality of a trial. Rhett split his time between his ranch and town, gathering what evidence and testimony he could. It wasn't easy. Most people were reluctant to speak ill of the dead, especially someone as influential as Judge Warren had been. But bit by bit, he and Tobias, now sobering up and remembering his legal skills, built their case. On the morning of the trial, a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. The circuit judge, a stern man named Isaiah Parker, had arrived the previous day. Known for his fairness but strict adherence to the law, Judge Parker would be a challenging audience. Hazel, dressed in the cleanest dress Mrs. Peterson could provide, was escorted from the jail by Sheriff Dawson. The crowd parted silently, some spitting at her feet, others merely watching with morbid curiosity. She kept her head high, though her hands trembled visibly. Inside the courthouse, she was surprised to see Rhett and Tobias Wells waiting at the defense table. The former lawyer was barely recognizable, clean-shaven, his suit pressed, his eyes clear for perhaps the first time in years. "Ms. Montgomery," he greeted her formally. "I'll be representing you today, with Mr. Blackwood's assistance. Hazel's eyes filled with grateful tears as she glanced at Rhett. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied quietly. "This won't be easy." The trial began with the prosecution laying out their case straightforward and damning. Multiple witnesses testified to seeing Hazel shoot Judge Warren in broad daylight. The sheriff testified about finding the shotgun in her hands, the judge dead at her feet. Then it was the defense's turn. "Your Honor," Tobias began, his voice stronger than it had been in years, "we do not contest that Ms. Montgomery fired the shot that killed Judge Warren. What we contest is that this act constitutes murder." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Judge Warren was not the man this town believed him to be," Tobias continued. "He was a predator who used his position of power to intimidate and threaten vulnerable women. Ms. Montgomery acted in self-defense when the judge threatened her life." The prosecutor, a young man named James Harrison who had been appointed by the town council, leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations against a man who can no longer defend himself." "The evidence will speak for itself," Tobias replied calmly. Judge Parker frowned. "I'll allow the defense to present their evidence, but it had better be substantial, Mr. Wells. Serious accusations require serious proof." One by one, Tobias called his witnesses. First came Mrs. Peterson, reluctantly testifying that she had seen Judge Warren visiting Hazel's room at inappropriate hours and that Hazel had seemed increasingly distressed by these visits. Then came Sarah Fletcher, who worked at the general store. "I saw the judge follow Ms. Montgomery that day," she said hesitantly. "He looked angry, like I'd never seen him before. And he had something in his hand, though I couldn't see what it was." Most damning was the testimony of Isabella Martinez, a young woman who had worked as the judge's housekeeper 2 years prior. "He did the same to me," she said, her voice barely audible in the hushed courtroom. "Said no one would believe a Mexican girl over him. Said he'd have me deported if I didn't let him have his way." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting Hazel's across the room. "I ran. Middle of the night. Took nothing but the clothes on my back. Been working at the Travis Ranch ever since, too afraid to come to town." Finally, Tobias presented the notes Rhett had recovered from Hazel's room. Judge Parker read them silently, his expression growing darker with each one. "And how do we know these are authentic?" the prosecutor demanded. "They could have been forged." "I call Edward Thompson to the stand," Tobias replied. The town's banker approached, looking uncomfortable. After being sworn in, he confirmed that the handwriting matched numerous legal documents the judge had signed over the years. Throughout it all, Hazel sat straight-backed and still, her eyes occasionally meeting Rhett's. He gave her small nods of encouragement, his steady presence a balm to her frayed nerves. Finally, it was her turn to testify. She told her story simply and directly. About coming to Promise Creek after her husband's death. About the judge's initial kindness turning to possessiveness, then to threats. About that final confrontation when he'd cornered her outside the general store, knife in hand, promising to take what he wanted and then silence her permanently. "I didn't want to kill him," she finished, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I just wanted to live." The courtroom was utterly silent when she finished. Even those who had been most vocal about her guilt seemed subdued. In his closing argument, the prosecutor reminded the jury that taking a life was the most serious crime one could commit, regardless of the circumstances. He questioned the reliability of witnesses recalling events from years past and suggested that Hazel had manufactured her claims of self-defense after the fact. Tobias rose for the defense's closing, looking more like the respected lawyer he'd once been than the drunkard he'd become. "Gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we ask you to consider not just the moment when Hazel Montgomery pulled that trigger, but everything that led to it. A woman alone, being pursued by a powerful man who believed his position placed him above the law. A man who threatened not just her reputation, but her very life. He paused, looking each juror in the eye. The law recognizes the right of self-defense, the right to protect oneself from imminent harm. Hazel Montgomery did not set out to kill Judge Warren that day. She acted in the only way she could to save her own life. To find her guilty would be to say that women in this territory must submit to violence rather than defend themselves. Is that the message you wish to send to your wives, your daughters, your sisters? The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they filed back in, the foreman Harold Miller, the blacksmith, looked troubled. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Parker asked. "We have, Your Honor," Miller replied. "We find the defendant, Hazel Montgomery, not guilty by reason of self-defense." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by an outbreak of voices, some angry, some relieved. Judge Parker banged his gavel sharply. "Order! I will have order!" When the room quieted, he continued. "The jury has spoken. Ms. Montgomery, you are free to go." Hazel swayed slightly in her seat, overcome with relief. Beside her, Tobias smiled for the first time in what felt like years. And across the room, Rhett Blackwood nodded once, satisfaction clear in his eyes. But as they left the courthouse, it became apparent that not everyone accepted the verdict. A small crowd had gathered, their faces hostile. "Murdering harlot," someone shouted. "You bewitched that jury just like you tried to bewitch the judge." "She should hang anyway," called another voice. Sheriff Dawson pushed through, his face thunderous. "The court's made its decision," he said reluctantly. "But I'll tell you this, Ms. Montgomery, you won't find life easy in Promise Creek now. Some folks won't ever believe you, verdict or no verdict. Then perhaps it's time for her to make a fresh start elsewhere," Rhett said, stepping to Hazel's side. "My wagon's out back, Ms. Montgomery. I'd be happy to escort you wherever you'd like to go." Hazel looked up at him, gratitude and uncertainty warring in her expression. "I have nowhere to go, Mr. Blackwood. No family, no friends outside of Promise Creek." "Then I offer you temporary sanctuary at my ranch," he said quietly, "until you decide what's next. No strings attached, no obligation. Just a safe place to recover." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you. I accept." They slipped away from the courthouse through a side door, avoiding the worst of the crowd. Tobias accompanied them to Rhett's wagon, looking more at peace than he had in years. "You did it, Wells," Rhett said, extending his hand. "You've found your old self again." The lawyer shook his hand firmly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I found a new one." He turned to Hazel. "It was an honor to represent you, Ms. Montgomery. Whatever you decide to do next, I wish you well." "Thank you," she said, impulsively embracing him, "for believing me." As they pulled away from town, Hazel felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief at her freedom, gratitude toward Rhett and Tobias, but also a deep uncertainty about her future. She had been vindicated legally, but in the eyes of many, she would always be the woman who killed Judge Warren. "They'll calm down eventually," Rhett said, as if reading her thoughts. "People have short memories when there's new gossip to chew on." "Not for something like this," Hazel replied softly. "I'll always be tainted by it." "Then you start fresh somewhere else," he said simply.
Denver.
"San Francisco. Anywhere you want." She glanced at him curiously. "Why did you help me, Mr. Blackwood?" "Truly." Rhett was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. 10 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Powerful man, unwanted advances, threats when she refused. His knuckles whitened on the reins. She didn't have a shotgun handy, and there was no one to stand up for her afterward. Understanding dawned in Hazel's eyes. "I'm so sorry. She took her own life rather than live with the shame," he continued, his voice flat with old grief. "Left a letter explaining everything. I was working a cattle drive in Kansas when it happened. By the time I got back, the man responsible had made sure everyone believed she'd been unstable. Delusional. What did you do? Hazel asked softly. A grim smile touched his lips. What any brother would do. I confronted him.
It got
physical. He drew on me, but I was faster. He glanced at her. I was cleared of wrongdoing self-defense, just like you. But some people never believed it. Called me a murderer. Said I made up the story about my sister to justify killing a respected citizen. So you left. Started fresh in Wyoming territory. Built my ranch. Made a new life. He shrugged. It can be done. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creaking of the wagon the only sounds. The landscape opened up around them as they left the town behind rolling hills dotted with sage. The distant mountains blew against the sky. It's beautiful out here, Hazel remarked eventually. That it is, Rhett agreed. Different kind of beauty than back east, but it grows on you. I wouldn't know, she admitted. I've never been east of the Mississippi. Grew up in Missouri, met my husband there, followed him to Colorado when he got work in the mines. And after he died, drifted. Took work where I could find it. Ended up in Promise Creek because the stagecoach broke an axle there, and I ran out of money waiting for it to be repaired. She smiled faintly. Fate, I suppose. Rhett glanced at her. Do you believe in that?
fate.
Hazel considered the question seriously. I believe things happen for a reason, though the reason isn't always clear at the time. I believe God has a plan, even when it seems impossible to understand. Even when that plan includes suffering? Especially then, she said quietly. It's easy to believe in God's plan when everything is going well. The real test of faith comes in the darkness. They crested a rise, and suddenly the Double B Ranch spread out before them, a large main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and beyond, the vast pastures where hundreds of cattle grazed. Welcome to my home, Rhett said simply. It's magnificent, Hazel breathed. You built all this yourself? With these 2 hands and a lot of help, he replied with a touch of pride. Started with 20 acres and a dozen cattle. Now it's 2,000 acres and 800 head. As they approached, a middle-aged woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her weathered face broke into a smile when she recognized Rhett. About time you got back, she called. Supper's nearly ready, and I was fixing to feed it to the dogs if you didn't show soon. Rhett chuckled. Mrs. Abernathy, my housekeeper, he explained to Hazel. Makes the best biscuits in 3 territories and has the sharpest tongue to match. Mrs. Abernathy approached as Rhett helped Hazel down from the wagon. The older woman's keen eyes took in Hazel's simple dress, her tired face, and the small bundle of possessions. So you're the one they've been talking about, she said bluntly. The woman who shot Elias Warren. Hazel tensed, but before she could respond, Mrs. Abernathy continued, about time someone did. That man had wandering hands even 20 years ago when I worked at the hotel in Cheyenne. She turned to Rhett. You did right bringing her here. Some of those town folks would string her up given half a chance, court verdict or no. Relief washed over Hazel. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. Call me Mabel, the housekeeper replied. Any woman brave enough to stand up to a man like Warren is a friend of mine. Now come inside before the stew gets cold. Over the next few weeks, Hazel gradually settled into life at the Double B. Rhett had given her a small but comfortable room in the main house, and she quickly made herself useful helping Mabel with cooking and cleaning, mending clothes for the ranch hands, even learning to tend the kitchen garden. The ranch hands, initially wary of her, soon warmed to her quiet competence and kind manner. The story of her confrontation with Judge Warren had reached them, of course, but unlike the townsfolk, they seemed more impressed than scandalized. Reckon it took real courage, drawled Charlie, the grizzled foreman, one evening as they all sat around the dinner table. Standing up to a man like that didn't feel like courage at the time, Hazel admitted. Just survival. That's what courage is most times, Rhett commented from the head of the table. Doing what needs doing, even when you're scared half to death. Their eyes met briefly across the table, and something warm and unexpected flickered between them. Hazel quickly looked away, suddenly conscious of the ranch hand's knowing glances. Later that evening, she found Rhett on the porch, smoking a cigarette and gazing at the stars. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure if she should disturb him. "Join me if you like," he said without turning around. "Night's too beautiful to enjoy alone." Hazel stepped out, drawing her shawl tighter against the cool evening air. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, settling into the chair beside his. "For everything." "No need," he replied, offering her his flask. "Brandy? Takes the edge off the chill." She accepted it with a small smile, taking a delicate sip. The liquor burned pleasantly down her throat. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said after a moment. "Oh." His tone was carefully neutral. "I can't stay here forever." "I'm not your responsibility." "You're not a responsibility, Hazel. You're a guest. And you're welcome to stay as long as you wish." She turned to look at him directly.
Why?
"And please don't say it's because of your sister. That explains why you helped me at the trial, but not this." She gestured vaguely at the ranch around them. Rhett was silent for a long moment, contemplating his cigarette. Finally, he said, "Because I've never met anyone like you. Someone who endured what you did and still maintains her dignity, her compassion." He met her gaze steadily. "And because I enjoy your company." "Is that so hard to believe?" "For a man like you? Yes." Hazel's honesty surprised even herself. "You could have any woman you wanted. Women without my complications." A soft laugh escaped him. "You think I don't have complications of my own? I'm a man who left his home under a cloud of suspicion, who built a new life in a harsh land, who keeps mostly to himself because he learned the hard way that people are quick to judge and slow to understand." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Maybe that's why I understood you from the start. We're both outsiders in our own way." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch could have been. Hazel felt something shift in her perception of him, no longer just a rescuer, but a man with his own wounds, his own story. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything." He stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the starlit sky. "Just know that there's no rush for you to decide what's next. The Double B is big enough for both of us for as long as you want to stay." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good night, Hazel." "Good night, Rhett," she replied softly, watching him disappear into the house. She remained on the porch long after he'd gone, thinking about the unexpected turn her life had taken. 2 months ago, she'd been a struggling widow, then a terrified prisoner facing the hangman's noose. Now she was here, safe on this beautiful ranch, with a man who seemed to see past her notoriety to the woman beneath. It was more than she'd dare hope for, yet it left her with a strange sense of uncertainty. What did the future hold for a woman with her past? Could she truly start fresh, as Rhett had suggested? And what of these unexpected feelings stirring within her? The warmth that spread through her chest when Rhett entered her room, the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched. Was it merely gratitude, or something more? She wasn't ready to answer these questions yet. For now, it was enough to be safe, to be believed, to have a moment to breathe after the nightmare she'd endured. The stars continued their slow dance across the sky as Hazel sat in contemplation, feeling for the first time in months that perhaps her own story wasn't yet finished, that there might still be chapters worth writing ahead. Summer slipped into autumn, bringing cooler days and frost-touched nights to the Double B. Hazel found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to ride better, to help with simple ranch chores, even to shoot with Rhett's patient instruction, just in case, he'd said, though both knew the unspoken reality that some in town still harbored ill toward her. Her relationship with Rhett evolved gradually, a slow dance of growing trust and understanding. They spent evenings talking on the porch, sharing stories of their pasts. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about driving cattle across the plains before settling in Wyoming. She spoke of her brief marriage to Thomas, of her dreams of someday having a family of her own. What remained unspoken was the deepening attraction between them, the lingering glances, the way they found reasons to be in the same room, the electricity that seemed to crackle in the air when they were alone together. Neither seemed ready to acknowledge it, both perhaps too scarred by their pasts to risk their hearts so soon. One crisp October morning, Hazel was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw 3 riders coming down the road toward the ranch and recognized with a jolt the distinctive shape of Sheriff Dawson's hat. Her hands froze on the wet sheet she'd been hanging. Instinctively, she glanced toward the barn where she knew Rhett was working with a new colt. As if sensing her distress, he emerged moments later, his expression darkening when he spotted the approaching riders. He crossed the yard to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Stay calm," he murmured. "You've been cleared. They can't touch you legally." "Legal doesn't always matter out here," she replied, her voice barely audible. The riders pulled up in the yard. Beside Sheriff Dawson, there was his deputy, a young man named Collins, and James Harrison, the prosecutor from Hazel's trial. Blackwood, Dawson greeted coldly. "Miss Montgomery." "Sheriff," Rhett replied evenly. "What brings you all the way out to the Double B? Cattle rustlers giving you trouble?" "This isn't a social call," Harrison interjected. "We're here on official business." "Oh." Rhett's tone remained casual, but Hazel noticed how he subtly shifted to place himself slightly in front of her. "And what official business would that be?" Harrison dismounted, dusting off his suit. "New evidence has come to light regarding the Warren case. We need to speak with Ms. Montgomery." Hazel's heart lurched painfully in her chest. "What evidence?" she managed to ask. "That's for a judge to hear," Dawson said. "Not to be discussed in a ranch yard." "You can discuss it with me right here," Rhett said firmly. "Or you can leave. Those are your options." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. "Don't make this difficult, Blackwood. We have the authority." "You have no authority here," Rhett cut him off. "This is my land. And Miss Montgomery has already been tried and acquitted. Double jeopardy applies." Harrison's lip curled slightly. "Not if there's evidence of perjury. A witness has come forward claiming Ms. Montgomery admitted to planning the judge's murder days in advance." "That's a lie," Hazel exclaimed, her voice sharp with shock. "Who's this witness?" Rhett demanded. "Lillian Potter," Harrison replied smugly. "She says MS. Montgomery confided in her at the dressmaker's shop the week before the shooting. Said the judge had spurned her romantic advances, and she wouldn't let him get away with it." Hazel felt as if she'd been slapped. Lillian Potter, the judge's sister-in-law, who had always treated Hazel with thinly veiled contempt. "That's absurd," she said. "I barely knew Mrs. Potter. We certainly weren't confidants." "That's for a court to decide," Dawson said. "Now, are you coming willingly? Or do we need to make this ugly?" Rhett's hand moved to rest on his own pistol. "The only thing that's going to get ugly is what happens if you try to take her. She's not going anywhere." The tension in the yard thickened. Deputy Collins shifted nervously, his young face betraying his discomfort with the situation. Even Harrison seemed to realize that things were escalating dangerously. "Think carefully, Blackwood," the sheriff warned. "Interfering with an officer of the law is a serious offense." "So is harassment and false accusation," Rhett replied. "Ms. Montgomery was tried fairly and acquitted. This new evidence is nothing but a vindictive attempt by Warren's family to save face." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the timely arrival of Charlie and 3 other ranch hands, riding in from checking fence lines. They pulled up short when they saw the confrontation, then deliberately spread out, their message clear. Hazel and Rhett weren't alone. Sheriff Dawson assessed the situation, clearly not liking the odds. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he said finally. "We'll be back with more men and proper papers." "You do that," Rhett replied calmly. "And I'll be waiting with Tobias Wells and a writ from the circuit court prohibiting this harassment. Judge Parker won't take kindly to you trying to circumvent his ruling." Something in his confidence must have given Harrison pause. "You're bluffing," the prosecutor said, but with less certainty than before. "Try me." Rhett's blue eyes were cold as Wyoming winter. "I sent a writer to Judge Parker the moment we heard rumors about Lillian Potter's so-called testimony. Should have his response any day now." It was indeed a bluff, but a convincing one. After a tense moment, Harrison nodded curtly to the sheriff. "We'll return when we have the proper documentation. This isn't finished." As they rode away, Hazel's knees nearly buckled with relief. Rhett caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "They'll be back," she whispered. "With more men, just like he said." "No, they won't." There was absolute certainty in Rhett's voice. "Because we're going to beat them to Judge Parker. We're leaving for Cheyenne tonight." True to his word, Rhett had them on the road to Cheyenne by nightfall. Charlie and the ranch hands would look after the Doubleby in their absence. They traveled light and fast, pushing their horses as much as was safe. "I'm sorry about this," Hazel said as they made camp the first night. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Rhett looked up from the fire he was building. "Don't apologize for other people's vindictiveness. None of this is your fault. But if you hadn't killed him, you'd be dead," Rhett said bluntly. "And he would have moved on to his next victim. Men like Warren don't stop." The fire caught, flames licking at the kindling. In the dancing light, Rhett's face looked harder, more determined than she'd ever seen it. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. "Risking your reputation, your ranch, maybe even your life? For me?" Rhett was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally looked up, the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "Because I care about you, Hazel. More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know the timing is all wrong. You're still recovering from trauma, still building a new life. And I'm not asking for anything in return. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do everything in my power to keep you safe." The simple honesty of his declaration left her speechless. It was everything she'd begun to hope for, yet feared to acknowledge. "I care about you too," she whispered finally. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of bringing more danger to your door. Of not being worthy of someone like you. Of caring for someone and losing them again." She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "I lost Thomas so suddenly. I don't know if I could bear that kind of pain again." Rhett moved to sit beside her, close but not touching. "Life offers no guarantees, Hazel. Not for any of us. All we can do is decide whether the joy is worth the risk of pain." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I think it is. But I'll understand if you don't feel the same way." Instead of answering, Hazel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Rhett's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I'm willing to risk it," she said softly. "Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." The smile that spread across Rhett's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He kissed her again, and for a little while, the dangers awaiting them in Cheyenne seemed very far away. They reached Cheyenne 3 days later, tired but determined. The territorial capital was larger and busier than Promise Creek, with proper brick buildings lining the main street and a constant flow of people and wagons. Judge Parker was holding court in the Territorial Courthouse, a grand building by frontier standards. They waited in the gallery until the day's proceedings concluded, then approached as the room began to clear. "Judge Parker," Rhett said, removing his hat respectfully. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Rhett Blackwood, and this is Hazel Montgomery. We've come on urgent business regarding her recent trial in Promise Creek." The judge peered at them over his spectacles, recognition dawning.
Ah, yes.
The Warren case. Quite a stir that caused. He gestured to the empty jury box.
"Sit.
"Tell me what brings you all the way to Cheyenne." They explained the situation: Lillian Potter's false accusation, the sheriff's attempted arrest, the clear vendetta against Hazel. Judge Parker listened intently, his expression grave. When they finished, he sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, this does not surprise me. Judge Warren had many friends in high places. His death was inconvenient for certain interests in the territory." "Then you believe us?" Hazel asked hopefully. "I believe that justice was served in your trial, Ms. Montgomery." The evidence was clear, the jury's verdict sound. He removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "And I believe that some people find it difficult to accept when their heroes fall from grace." "What can we do?" Rhett asked. "They'll keep coming after her." The judge considered for a moment. "I can issue a writ preventing any further legal action against Ms. Montgomery regarding the Warren case, without my direct approval. That should discourage Sheriff Dawson's official harassment." "And unofficially?" Hazel pressed. Judge Parker's eyes were kind but realistic. "Unofficially, Ms. Montgomery, there will always be those who believe the worst of you, regardless of evidence. Human nature, I'm afraid." "So we're back where we started," she said softly. "I'm free, but not truly free." "Not necessarily." The judge leaned forward. "Wyoming territory is progressive in many ways. Women have more rights here than in many states. You could build a new life, perhaps not in Promise Creek, but elsewhere." "Or," Rhett interjected, "you could fight back." Both Hazel and the judge looked at him in surprise. "The truth is a powerful weapon," Rhett continued. "Judge Warren's crimes have been proven in court, but the details remain largely unknown outside of Promise Creek. What if we made them known?" "You mean publish the story?" Hazel asked.
"Exactly."
"The Cheyenne Tribune has a reputation for honest reporting. If they printed the full account of the trial, including the evidence of Warren's predatory behavior, it would be scandalous," Judge Parker warned, "but potentially effective. Public opinion can be a powerful force." Hazel considered the idea. Part of her wanted simply to run, to find some remote place where no one had heard of Judge Warren or Hazel Montgomery. But another part, the part that had found the courage to defend herself that fateful day, was tired of hiding, tired of shame that wasn't hers to bear. "Let's do it," she said finally. "Let's tell the truth." The next day, they met with Edward Brannigan, editor of the Cheyenne Tribune. Initially skeptical, he became increasingly interested as they laid out the story, complete with copies of Warren's threatening notes and affidavits from the trial witnesses. "This is explosive material," he said, rifling through the documents. "Warren had connections all the way to Washington. Publishing this will make enemies. It will also sell newspapers," Rhett pointed out pragmatically, "and serve justice." Brannigan couldn't argue with either point. "I'll run it in tomorrow's edition. Front page." They spent that night at Cheyenne's finest hotel, courtesy of Rhett. After dinner in the hotel restaurant, they retired to the parlor of their adjoining rooms. "Are you sure about this?" Rhett asked as they sat before the fire. "Once that story runs, there's no going back. Your name will be known throughout the territory." "I'm sure," Hazel replied, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'm tired of hiding. Tired of being ashamed of defending my own life." She took his hand, drawing strength from his touch. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Right? The tenderness in his eyes made her heart flutter. Together, he agreed, raising her hand to his lips. The Tribune's story broke like a thunderclap across Wyoming territory. Respected judge exposed. The truth behind the Warren shooting, screamed the headline. Beneath it, Brannigan had laid out the entire case in painstaking detail: Warren's pattern of predation, the testimonies from multiple women, the threatening notes, and Hazel's desperate act of self-defense. The reaction was swift and polarized. Some condemned the newspaper for smearing a dead man's reputation. Others, particularly women, wrote letters of support for Hazel, some even sharing their own experiences with powerful men who had abused their positions. Most importantly, the story reached higher authorities. The territorial governor, under pressure from constituents, ordered an official investigation into Warren's conduct as a judge. Sheriff Dawson was instructed to cease any further action against Hazel pending the investigation's completion. Lillian Potter publicly retracted her accusation, claiming she had been mistaken in her recollection. The humiliation of having her brother-in-law's crimes exposed to the world had apparently dampened her thirst for vengeance. A week after the story ran, Rhett and Hazel prepared to return to the Double B. They had accomplished what they came for. Judge Parker's writ was in their possession, and the tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically in Hazel's favor. On their last night in Cheyenne, Rhett surprised her with a candlelit dinner in a private dining room at the hotel. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and barely touching his steak. "Is something wrong?" Hazel asked eventually. "No," he said quickly. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's
Right.
more right than I ever expected it to be." He took a deep breath. "Hazel, these past months have been the most meaningful of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your courage, your kindness, your resilience. It's changed me." Her heart began to race as she realized where this might be heading. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued. "And I know you're still finding your feet after everything that's happened. But I don't want to waste any more time." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I love you, Hazel Montgomery. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small diamond that caught the candlelight. Tears sprang to Hazel's eyes. "Rhett, you don't have to answer right away," he said hurriedly. "I understand if you need time to." "Yes," she interrupted, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief and joy washed over his face. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left both of them breathless. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. Never thought I'd be happy again. You've given me back my life, my future. You've given me just as much," he replied softly. "A reason to come home at night. Someone to build a life with." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Double B. Mabel decorated the ranch house with autumn flowers, and Charlie proudly served as Rhett's best man. To their surprise, several guests made the journey from Cheyenne, including Judge Parker, who officiated, and Edward Brannigan, who published a considerably more cheerful story about the wedding in the Tribune. Even more surprising was the appearance of Sarah Fletcher and a few other former residents of Promise Creek, people who had quietly supported Hazel during her trial and now wished to celebrate her happiness. As they exchanged vows beneath the brilliant blue Wyoming sky, Hazel reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. From the darkest moment of her life had come the greatest joy. From being called a liar and a murderer, she had found her way to truth and love. Rhett's hand was steady as he placed the wedding band on her finger. His eyes, looking into hers, held the promise of all the years to come, years they would face together, whatever they might bring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared, beaming at the couple. "Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride." As Rhett's lips met hers, sealing their vows with a kiss that held both tenderness and passion, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home at last. 5 years later, the Doubleby Ranch had prospered beyond even Rhett's ambitious dreams. New buildings had been added, the herd had grown, and the ranch's reputation for quality cattle was known throughout the West. But the greatest treasures of the ranch weren't measured in acres or cattle. They could be found in the main house, which had been expanded to accommodate a growing family. 3-year-old Thomas, named for Hazel's first husband in a gesture of remembrance and respect, chased his 1-year-old sister Rebecca through the parlor, their laughter filling the house with joy. Hazel watched them from the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child grew. The journey hadn't always been easy. There had been difficult pregnancies, harsh winters, cattle disease, and occasional reminders of the past when newcomers to the area heard whispers of that woman who shot the judge. But there had also been love deep, abiding, and true. Rhett had kept his promise, standing beside her through everything, never once doubting her, never once making her feel anything less than cherished. The scandal had faded with time, as scandals do. The territorial investigation had eventually confirmed what Hazel's trial had already established, that Judge Warren had abused his position to prey on vulnerable women for years. His legacy was forever tarnished, while Hazel had built a new one based on truth and resilience. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, a gentle hand splaying across her belly. "How are my girls doing today?" Rhett murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "What makes you so sure it's a girl?" Hazel teased, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Just a feeling," he replied. "Though I'd be just as happy with another boy. As long as this one sleeps through the night sooner than Thomas did, I'll be satisfied." She turned in his arms, studying the beloved face that had only grown more dear to her over the years. Silver threaded through his hair at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze when it rested on her still held the same tenderness it had the day they wed. "I was thinking," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "about inviting Tobias for Christmas. Charlie says he's doing well in his new law practice in Laramie." "That's a wonderful idea," Hazel agreed. "We owe him so much." "We owe each other more," Rhett replied softly. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, you know." She smiled, remembering the solitary, guarded man she'd first met in that jail cell. "We saved each other. And look what we've built together." Their moment was interrupted by Thomas barreling into their legs.
"Papa."
"Come see what I built." Rhett laughed, swooping the boy up into his arms. "Let's go see this masterpiece, shall we?" As they moved toward the children's play area, Hazel followed more slowly, one hand supporting her back. Standing in the doorway, she watched as Rhett admired the wooden block structure his son had created, Rebecca babbling excitedly at his side. This was her life now, so different from anything she could have imagined that terrible day when a shotgun blast had shattered her world. She had been called a liar, a murderer, a woman of loose morals. She had faced the gallows and the contempt of an entire town. But one man had stood beside her, believing in her without question, defending her without reservation. One man had seen past the scandal to the truth beneath. One man had loved her enough to risk everything for her. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, not just his love, but the chance to love herself again. To rebuild her life on a foundation of truth and trust. To find happiness when she'd thought it forever beyond her reach. As if sensing her thoughts, Rhett looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The love in that gaze still took her breath away, even after all these years. "Come join us," he called, holding out his hand to her. "The children have something to show you." Hazel crossed the room, taking his outstretched hand, feeling the familiar calluses against her palm. Whatever the future held, whatever joys or sorrows awaited them, they would face it, as they had faced everything since that fateful day in Promise Creek. together, believing in each other, never needing proof.